Well, you have already shown what people of faith need to have. It's called stamina. Right? Stamina. Before I came over here for tonight, I watched a presidential press conference that talked about a caravan of refugees and immigrants coming to our southern border in the U.S. and why we must send 15,000 military troops to welcome them. So, I think we need to stand up for a moment. And I was told to bring a Christian voice tonight. So what struck me, listening to all of these wonderful words of peace, what struck me was the instruction I got from your leaders to come here. The task of the opening plenary is to be clear, concise, and courageous about what undergirds this lofty project of radical inclusion and love. How does this lofty project and all of our words, how do they relate to what's happening right now, facing an election in my country right now? So I want to suggest that we do what is in my Christian tradition, something we do and often don't even think about. It's called passing of the peace. I want you just to stand, look to your neighbor, and just say simply, it's time to pass the peace. Thank you. You can hug too, that's okay. You can hug too. Okay, now we've stood up, got the blood flowing. So, when PBS is doing a new movie on one of my mentors, her name is Dorothy Day, the founder of the Catholic Worker Movement. So they came by this week to do this film, to talk about how I met Dorothy. And I thought of her when I thought of tonight, because when I went to visit Dorothy, there was this graffiti on the wall in a building on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. And it was a reporter talking to Mahatma Gandhi. And the reporter said, "Reporter, Mr. Gandhi, what do you think of Western civilization?" Gandhi said, "I think it would be a good idea." So I imagine that graffiti now tonight being reporter. What do you think of Christians who follow Jesus, millennial? I think it would be a good idea. So that's where we are. So I want to be concise and clear in the few minutes I have. The horrifying, traumatic, and tragic deadly violence of last week against Jews in Pittsburgh, African Americans in Kentucky, as well as the attempted assassinations of national political leaders with pipe bombs, has been very clarifying. I was asked 10 times tonight before I walked in, what do you think of the elections? Next Tuesday. Next week, in the election in the United States, the midterm election is nothing less than a referendum on white nationalism in the United States. let's be clear. The attempted murder of our administration's critics, 2 black Americans killed in a grocery store after an attack on a black church failed, and the massacre of Jews at their temple were all carried out by people with an ideology. All carried out by people with an ideology. The ideology is white supremacist nationalism, and it is the greatest threat of terror in America. And let's be clear, without presidential rhetoric in the last 2 weeks, with its anti-immigrant and anti-refugee venom, the Jews who are gone today might still be with their families and with us. That's what we are facing when, let's put it this way. Abraham Lincoln, one of our presidents, once said that our leaders should appeal to our better angels. That's what he said. Our better angels. But now we have a president who is appealing to our worst demons. And the demons are right below the surface. The battle now for people of faith is between angels and demons. Are we ready as people of faith, not just to speak our faith and give expression, but to live and act our faith, even when it brings to us what faith always brings, which I will call risk. There is risk ahead. Yesterday, October 31st, a group of interfaith leaders in Washington, D.C., literally, we just got together on a moment's notice to call for a national prayer vigil for the next 6 days, beginning today. A prayer vigil where Rabbi David Saperstein, as you heard before, he finished the reading of the Torah that those who were shot and killed never got to hear. He finished the reading for that day about Abraham and Sarah welcoming their guests, a welcome that was interrupted. So those of us who got together decided to call for this 6 days of prayer. In our individual lives, our families, or on our kitchen tables, places of work, places of worship, because prayer at this moment can't be perfunctory. Can't be the add-on at the end of our meeting. It's going to have to take us to a deeper and deeper place. So I will, in my Christian voice, go back to Jesus for a moment and conclude there. There's a question that got asked of Jesus by a lawyer. I think he was a Washington, D.C. lawyer, because I know that tone of voice. He says, what do I do to be okay and religious and go to heaven? And Jesus said, well, 2 things, simple. Love God, love your neighbor. All of our faith traditions have some version of that, right? And he said, well, who is my neighbor? He wasn't looking to expand the notion, but to narrow it. Jesus, in Luke 10, tells the story of, you've probably heard it, the Good Samaritan, right? You know that story? Well, none of the people around Jesus thought Samaritans were good. They didn't like them. They were mixed race, foreigners, half-breeds. And he chose one that was other for his example of what it means to love your neighbor. Then, of course, you know, this man finds this man who's been attacked, and he goes to help him. And we think the story is about, well, help other people and serve them, and take your time and take your energy and your resources and even inconvenience Those are all wonderful lessons, but that wasn't the heart of his message. The heart of Jesus' message was, your neighbor is the one who's different than you. Your neighbor isn't the one that you just meet in your neighborhood or at the water cooler. In fact, Gustavo Gutierrez, a Latin American theologian, says it this way: who is my neighbor? The neighbor was the Samaritan who approached a wounded man and made him his neighbor. The neighbor is not who he found in his path. Is not whom I find in my path, but rather he is the one whose path I place myself, in whom I approach and actively seek. Who is my neighbor may become the biggest question, particularly for Christians, to look at right now. A reporter called just a half an hour ago, no, it was before the service, half hour before that, and he said, all this language about these refugees and caravans and the army, why aren't Christians speaking about that? Or why aren't they saying what they think about that, particularly those who are the evangelical advisors to the president? It's because sometimes religious leaders make trade-offs with power, political power. And we all know how that is done in all of our traditions. We make trade-offs with power for the things we want, and the evangelical advisors to Donald Trump have made a trade-off, and they've traded off Jesus. So when they separated children from their parents, stripped kids from their moms, and we had 700 prayer vigils across the country, and when parents and moms and dads brought their kids to those vigils, they were saying, these kids who've been separated are our kids too. That's what all the parents were saying. They're our kids too. It was very interfaith and no faith at all, but something had happened that we just couldn't quite deal with or take anymore. They were taking the kids away from their parents, and I just heard they're going to do it again. So the question for us is, how do we take all of I'm so blessed to be here tonight, to hear all these words and seeing these kids singing and dancing. Even at this late hour, I feel encouraged and inspired. But what does it mean to take all of what is in this room, all we say we believe, all we say we stand for, all we say is in our tradition, and take all of that to the streets in these days? Things are going to get worse before they get better. And faith is going to have to go deeper to respond. If you think Donald Trump is an anomaly, look at how nationalism is growing all over the world, in every nation, against all the things that we said tonight we believe. It's a whole shift of what's happening in our world. It's happening everywhere. And what we say and do about this caravan, for example, is just another sign of that. So I thought tonight, hearing the president lay out his vision for the caravan, then I thought of all of you and being here tonight. So many people. What if when that caravan, still 2,000 miles away from our southern border, full of desperate, hungry, fearful people, what if that caravan was not just met by 15,000 U.S. soldiers, but thousands of people of faith there to welcome the caravan? Welcome the caravan, and in all our traditions, all of them, how we welcome and treat the other, the stranger, is a test of our faith. Test of our faith. So I was just thinking tonight, what if we all just went to welcome them? Many activists that we work with across the country are thinking about accompanying those refugees. What in the last day? What if the last 2 days we walked together with those refugees and the cameras weren't just on the army, but they're on all the people welcoming those who came? Because here's what it means to act in hope at our moment. The Bible says hope, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. My paraphrase of that is this for all of us: hope is believing in spite of the evidence, then watching the evidence change. Thank you very much.